What if I told you the most powerful empire of the last century didn't rule with tanks, didn't rule with colonies, and didn't rule with flags planted in foreign soil? What if it ruled with paper? Not just any paper. The US dollar. Today, nearly 60% of global foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. Around 80 to 90% of global trade is invoiced in dollars at some stage. Oil, food, machinery, debt, sanctions, bailouts, all flow through one currency. But here's the mystery. How did one nation's money become the bloodstream of the entire global economy? And more importantly, who helped it happen? Because the dollar didn't conquer the world alone. To understand that, we have to go back to a time when the United States wasn't the financial king, it was a debtor. Welcome to its financial history too. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the global financial center wasn't New York, it was London. The British pound sterling, backed by the vast reach of the British Empire, dominated global trade. The City of London financed railroads in Latin America, ports in Asia, and factories in Africa. If you wanted to borrow money, you borrowed in pounds. If you traded goods across oceans, you settled in pounds. The system was anchored by the gold standard. Currencies were tied to gold. Stability was the promise. Then came World War I. Europe burned. Britain drained its gold reserves. France collapsed under debt. Germany spiraled into chaos. And across the Atlantic, the United States quietly transformed from borrower to lender. By 1918, European nations owed billions to American banks and the U.S. Treasury. Gold flowed into American vaults. New York began to rival London. But dominance wasn't immediate. It required infrastructure and powerful allies. Enter the Federal Reserve, created in 1913. For the first time, the U.S. had a central bank capable of coordinating liquidity and stabilizing crises. American financial markets deepened. Wall Street expanded. Then came World War II, the real turning point. While Europe and Asia were devastated again, American industry surged. By 1945, the U.S. held roughly 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Its factories were intact. Its military was unmatched. Its economy represented nearly half of global GDP. The world needed rebuilding, and America had the money. In 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered at a quiet resort in New Hampshire. The meeting would change financial history. The Bretton Woods Conference. There the U.S. negotiated a system where global currencies would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. It sounded like stability, but look closer. This meant every country needed dollars to trade. Central banks accumulated dollars. Global commerce flowed through U.S. financial channels. And two new institutions were born to reinforce the system: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The IMF would provide emergency loans in dollars. The World Bank would finance reconstruction in dollars. The dollar wasn't just a currency anymore. It was infrastructure. But America didn't build this system alone. European allies accepted dollar dominance because they needed stability. War-torn economies needed capital. Japan accepted it under U.S. occupation and security guarantees. Oil-producing nations would later accept it for a different reason: security. Which brings us to the next critical chapter. In 1971, the system cracked. By the late 1960s, the U.S. was spending heavily on the Vietnam War and on domestic programs like the Great Society. Dollars flooded the world. Foreign governments began doubting whether the U.S. actually had enough gold to back all those dollars. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, demanded gold in exchange for its dollar reserves. Gold began leaving U.S. vaults. The pressure mounted until August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon went on television and announced the suspension of dollar convertibility into gold. The gold window closed. The Bretton Woods system ended. In theory, this should have been the dollar's downfall. The promise tying it to gold was gone. But here's the twist. Instead of collapsing, the dollar became even more powerful. Why? Because of oil. In the 1970s, the U.S. reached a strategic understanding with Saudi Arabia. Oil would be priced exclusively in dollars. In return, the U.S. would provide military protection and security guarantees. Soon, OPEC followed. Now, any country that wanted oil, which meant every country needed dollars. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. The dollar no longer needed gold. it had energy. And the cycle reinforced itself. Countries earned dollars by exporting goods to the US. They used those dollars to buy oil. Oil producers recycled those dollars into US Treasury bonds that financed US deficits, which allowed more spending, which created more global dollar supply. A feedback loop. Wall Street grew deeper. US Treasury markets became the safest, most liquid place to park money. During every global crisis, from the Asian financial crisis to the 2008 crash, investors rushed into dollars. Even when the crisis started in America. Especially during the 2008 financial crisis. When institutions like Lehman Brothers collapsed, the Federal Reserve extended dollar swap lines to foreign central banks. It effectively became the world's central bank. That was another moment of hidden reinforcement. The world depended on dollar liquidity. And dependence creates power. Sanctions became a geopolitical weapon. Because global payments clear through US-controlled systems, Washington gained leverage over adversaries. Countries like Iran and Russia felt the weight of financial isolation not through bombs, but through banking restrictions. But dominance creates resentment. And here we reach the breaking point of the modern era. In the 2010s and 2020s, cracks began to show. The US national debt surged past $30 trillion. Quantitative easing expanded the money supply dramatically. After the COVID-19 pandemic, trillions more were injected into the system. Meanwhile, rivals watched. China expanded trade agreements denominated in yuan. Russia sought alternatives after sanctions. BRICS nations discussed alternative settlement systems. Central banks increased gold purchases at record levels in recent years. Patterns began repeating. Remember Britain after World War I? High debt, military overreach, financial strain. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes. Still, attempts to dethrone the dollar have struggled. The euro lacks unified fiscal authority. China's yuan remains tightly controlled by the state. Alternative payment systems lack the depth and trust of US financial markets. Because currency dominance isn't just about economics. It's about trust, rule of law, military power, deep capital markets, network effects, liquidity, predictability. The dollar sits at the center of a massive web built over 80 years. Trade contracts, debt markets, commodity exchanges, derivatives, all priced in dollars. Replacing it would mean rewiring the entire global system. That's not easy. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if the dollar doesn't collapse dramatically, but slowly erodes? Reserve share declining from 70% to below 60%. Bilateral trade agreements bypassing it. Regional blocs experimenting with alternatives. Digital currencies reshaping settlement rails. Empires rarely fall overnight. They weaken through gradual shifts in confidence. And confidence is invisible until it's gone. So what can we take from this story? First, the dollar didn't conquer the world by accident. It was built through wars, alliances, institutions, oil agreements, and strategic choices. It was reinforced by cooperation, sometimes voluntary, sometimes strategic. Second, currency dominance depends on trust and network effects more than gold or military force alone. Once a system becomes deeply embedded, it gains inertia. That inertia protects it, but also hides vulnerabilities. Third, every reserve currency in history eventually faced decline. The Spanish silver dollar, the Dutch guilder, the British pound. The question isn't whether change can happen. It's how and how slowly. Today the dollar remains dominant. It finances global trade. It anchors central bank reserves. It empowers US foreign policy. But the same forces that built its empire, debt, geopolitical strategy, global interdependence, could shape its future. Will we look back at this era as the height of dollar supremacy, or the beginning of multipolar money? That answer won't come from a single event. It will emerge from patterns, debt trends, trade shifts, political alliances, technological changes. So the next time you hold a dollar, or see headlines about sanctions, oil prices, or central bank gold buying, remember, you're watching an empire of paper in motion. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping global power. Because the real battles of the 21st century may not be fought with missiles, but with money,